Back to an evening with Pat. No, welcome back to our regular council meeting. We are reconvening at 7:10 p.m. and we have no public hearing tonight. And item 5, public comments. I don't believe we have any public comments. No delegations. So we move now to item 7, consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda that any of the councillors would like to see removed and discussed individually? Deputy Mayor Wiley?
I would make the motion and I might speak to at least 2 of the items on here. I move that council adopt the recommendations of the following agenda reports by an omnibus motion. 8.1, regular council meeting minutes for December 3rd. 9.1, amenity opportunity resolution number 234.07.25 amendment. 9.2, 2026 and 2027 United Way funding memorandum of understanding. 9.3, RCMP watch clerk multi-year funding memorandum of agreement. 9.4, land use agreement extension, number 3 Park Lane Drive. 11.2.1, Strathmore Municipal Library Board minutes for October 21st. 9.2.1, Medemsa CAO report on call volumes to October 2025. 12.1, letter from Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Services. And if I could speak to this.
Yes.
I know for people at home that these omnibus motions might seem like a lot of information being passed in a very small amount of time, but council's given a very thorough agenda package. Every item on here is a win. The agenda packages are available online for anyone interested in learning more, and they're certainly welcome to reach out to me as a councillor if there's anything in here that's concerned. Some of the items on here that are quite exciting are the United Way funding MOU, the RCMP watch clerks. These are all just efficiencies and excellent opportunities for our community. So I am willing to support this as an omnibus motion.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on the motion regarding the consent agenda? Then I'll call the question. All in favor? And that motion is carried. We move now to item 9.5, water source and storage, presented by Ethan Wilson. Good evening, Ethan.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. Thank you. I gave a presentation similar to this about 14 months ago. So for those of you that are new to Council, I hope to provide an overview of the town's water supply. And then for those returning councillors, you will see that there are a few additional items in this presentation compared to the last time. It's been updated and slightly extended. So I'll start big. Regional geography. We are in the South Saskatchewan River Basin. This includes the Red Deer, the Bow, and the Oldman River watersheds. Strathmore is uniquely located on the boundary of 2 watersheds, being the Bow and the Red Deer. Basically, if you take the WID Canal as it passes from Wildflower through the golf course and into the Brentwood area is approximately that drainage line. Everything north and west of there flows to the Red Deer. Everything south and east of there flows to the Bow. So in effect, the town is in a portion of both of these river basins. Another item, when you look at the area from an agricultural perspective, this area has been referred to as Palliser's Triangle. So during John Palliser's British North America expedition in the 1800s, this area was originally described as too arid for settlement. But later exploration through what is now Saskatchewan and Alberta suggested that he was wrong and that the climate was favorable for farming. What we've learned over the past century and more is that it turns out both of these guys were right. It's just it depends on the time of when those inspections were carried out. So climate cycles, especially precipitation, can change crop outcomes and just life in general for the better at certain times. Going back to the water cycle, as some of us may remember, is what I see up here. And this is just basically the cycle of all water going up in the atmosphere, coming back down as rainwater, meltwater, freezing or melting of glaciers. But one thing to note here is, we've got a lot of uses on the surface, but don't forget about that groundwater and the impact that the atmosphere has on that groundwater, and replenishing those sources as well. So to look in at the Bow River, I'll focus on this a little bit closer because it is our water source. The river normally has flows between 50 and 300 cubic meters per second. That's at Cochrane, so upstream of Calgary. This is the main water source for the Calgary region, which includes Cochrane, Airdrie, Chestermere, and Strathmore, which is about 1.7 million people served daily. Don't forget that that also includes downstream municipalities, Bazzano, Brooks, Medicine Hat, many others. So this is definitely a important water body for the region. It is our only source of water at this time. So water delivery. So currently we get treated water from the East Calgary Regional Water Line, but we used to get raw water from the Bow River via the Western Irrigation District. They both have their pros and cons. I would lean to say that the current setup that we have is more beneficial than the alternative. We get regional efficiencies in treatment, and we don't have to have significant water storage when we get treated water from Calgary. We are dependent on an outside infrastructure source, and it is only a single delivery system. There is no alternative than the one line we have from Calgary to Strathmore. The other option, or the historical option, we have the ability to treat water as we need. But the downside to that is you need a large raw water storage requirement. And for those who have been in town for many years, the area where Lakewood is now being developed used to be our raw water storage site. That quarter section was about half to 2/3 consumed by raw water storage. It also meant that we could not have winter water delivery because the WID does not deliver water or is not operating between late October and May. It meant that you had to have enough water stored in Strathmore to survive the winter. And lastly, if you have your own treatment system, you have to have additional qualified staff. Right now, we have the flexibility of not having to have water treatment staff through our service provider because we don't provide that service directly. We still have qualified staff to make sure that the water quality as it gets to Strathmore is adequate. They can add chlorine if that's necessary, but we don't have to have physical treatment qualified staff. To give you a quick overview as well, the dark blue line is the water line from Calgary compared to the light blue line, which is the WID route. You'll notice that the WID route is significantly longer. You'll also notice that, or you'll know based on the regional geography, is that the WID route also is an open channel. So you get evaporative losses, you get seepage, you also have that chance for surface contaminants. There is the third option, as I would call it, which is water wells. These could be a source of water. However, like I mentioned earlier, these still remove water from the overall water system. Just because it's groundwater, it's still part of the water cycle. So water wells would require treatment very similar to the WID. And therefore, we would get from the water wells to raw water storage, to water treatment, to treated water storage, to delivery. Quick overview of water treatment, just that it is a complicated process. You got to go from coagulation to sedimentation to filtration to disinfection. And each of these steps have their own unique processes. There are different ways of doing each step, but in general terms, this is the water treatment process. Looking at storage of water and specifically storage of treated water, Strathmore has changed over the last 15 to 20 years. Before 2010, when we were still treating water in Strathmore, we had two main reservoirs. That would be the Brentwood Reservoir and the Westmount Reservoir. The Brentwood Reservoir still stands today. The Westmount Reservoir was adjacent to the former town hall and was decommissioned in and around 2018. We added the Wildflower Reservoir at the same time that we added the water line from Calgary. There was a couple of reasons for this, but primarily it was to ensure that we had enough treated water storage for emergency situations, especially firefighting. As I mentioned, in 2018, the Brentwood Reservoir was decommissioned. But unfortunately, around the same time, the condition of the Brentwood Reservoir was noted to be deteriorating. And as such, since then, we've been operating Brentwood at 50% of its capacity. We note that if you get over 50% of capacity, it has the potential to leak. There's no structural risk if we fill it full, but we do know that over time, this reservoir needs to be decommissioned, and that's within our capital plan for 2026. So currently, we have an effective capacity of about 14,500 cubes of water. What does this mean? When you look at what we use daily, you can see on average, we use about 4,000 cubes a day. So we currently have between 3 and 4 days of storage. However, when you look at our maximum day, so this would be a hot day in the summer, everybody's out watering their grass, kids are playing in the sprinklers, many additional uses than just general hygiene, we're 7,800 cubic meters a day. So that means our storage is now down to 2 days. Not an issue. When we look at what our requirements are, there are different requirements based on different agencies. The most stringent one for the town of Strathmore is a storage requirement of about 8,000 cubes. So with our capacity currently at 14,500 and our capacity in 2026, once the Brentwood Reservoir is decommissioned, of being 11,500, we still have about 30% free storage. We need to, however, look ahead. When does it mean that the storage isn't enough, the water supply isn't enough, or are there other items which mean that water is a critical issue? I've updated these charts since the last time we looked. So if you look here, this is using a medium growth rate, and this is using a median use of water. Basically, our reservoir limitation is the year 2040. So, and to be clear, that's the 11,500. That's only Wildflower Reservoir. So in 2040 is when we would reach our limit. And from a water license perspective, which I haven't touched on yet, we would get to 2045. However, I do want to note that, you know, if we have some efforts of being water conscious, we can extend that out to possibly 2050 in reservoir capacity and 2055 in license limitations. So the difference in just simply how much water we use every day is a big difference in how long our reservoir is sufficient and how long our current water licenses will last. The other thing I want to point out is when I showed this presentation just over a year ago, this has changed by almost 3 years. So it was 2053 when I gave this presentation in 2024. Another thing to look at is what if we keep using the same amount of water but we have significant growth? So that's what this shows. And that would mean that our reservoir capacities are only good for about 10 more years, 2036. And it means our license capacity is only good for about another 3 years on top of that, 2039. So as I've mentioned, if we can reduce the average usage, if we can increase our storage, or if we can secure more water supply, will all help to ensuring that we have sufficient water in the town.
Sorry, Ethan, Councillor Wegener?
Yeah, just looking at your projections in that, you've got the annual water use projection, average day projection. That all correlates to the population projection, so the increase in population.
Yeah. So that's taking two different scenarios of population projections.
Okay, thank you.
Ethan, do you know when we'll be looking at a new reservoir to replace the Brentwood one? I thought there was talk about one going on the eastern part of town.
There is, and so that's kind of where this presentation leads us to is, you know, we know that in different scenarios is when we need to target that reservoir. You know, if I go back a couple here, you know, our average growth and our average use means 2040 is when we need to have that new reservoir by. I would recommend we probably target 2 to 3 years prior to that, just for safety purposes. But as you can see, if we change the way that people use water or we increase growth significantly, they all change that date. And sometimes it brings it forward and sometimes it moves it backwards. The other thing to look at is the East Calgary Regional Water Line. This generally isn't a pinch point for the town of Strathmore. We have a significant amount of capacity on this water line. The water line was built for 4 users: Strathmore, Chestermere, Rocky View, and Wheatland. Currently, only Strathmore and Chestermere are the users. So there's the capacity of Wheatland and the capacity of Rocky View that's not being used currently. Of the 201 liters per second that Strathmore has, we're only using 90.4 currently. So we're under half of our allotted capacity on this line, never mind the additional capacity that's not being used. Another thing to look at is how much water can we get from Calgary? And so we've got 200 liters per second available on the water line, but in our current agreement with Calgary, we can only get to about 130. I'm not saying that that can't be increased in the future, but under our current agreement, we've got what we use, what we could use, and what the water line can handle, and they all align, one being bigger than the rest. So to clarify, the East Calgary Regional Water Line is not a pinch point for us in the short term or even the medium term in my projections. So current status, reservoirs, good. Water licenses are good. ECRW capacity is good. When we do look ahead, we have a couple of options. One is to increase storage at Wildflower Reservoir. Currently, it's fully underground. We do have the option to also move it to be above grade. I would argue that there's also the opportunity to extend what I would call the underground portion, but both would have to be evaluated based on the timing and what we feel is needed at that time. But you can also see that if we would increase the capacity of Wildflower, we're going to increase our storage by a day, day and a half, 2 days, depending on where we're at in our growth projections and our usages and all those sort of things. So if we increase just Wildflower, and I go back to that medium growth and that medium usage, you can see we go from 2040 all the way to 2064. So that's a big difference with a little bit of addition. So I know, Mayor Field, you mentioned the East Reservoir, but this is a good interim solution to give us a significant amount of time until that East Reservoir is needed.
Thank you. Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you, Bishop. Do we have some sort of policy or target of what we're trying to kind of keep up with in terms of the number of days that we have in storage as our population grows? Like, are we trying to make sure that we always have 2 days, always have 3 days?
Yes. So that 8,000 cubic meter bare minimum is based on essentially 2 average days of usage.
Okay.
That's also more than sufficient for firefighting purposes. That also exceeds the Alberta environment requirements. I personally, I don't think we want to get right to that. I would probably take that number and add a buffer, 10, 20, maybe even probably around 10 to 20%, where we would say, you know what, this is where we need to start looking. We've still got some time, but I wouldn't want to wait till we got right close to that 8,000 number, because as we continue to grow and continue to use more water, that number also increases as well.
Perfect, thank you.
So I think the main limiting factor, so if I go back here, medium growth, medium usage, Wildflower's been expanded. Now our water license is our limiting factor. So now we run out of a water license allocation before we run out of storage capability, before we run out of water line capability. So that's where I'm noting that as we look ahead, water license is probably the first thing to target. And I know we've done that in the recent past. So I think we need to continue that where the opportunities exist.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. If we did, let's say, augment, for example, in the future, or we plan to augment the water supply, now it seems that water licenses are a limiting factor at this stage in your projections here. Are wells governed by water licenses?
Yes.
Or they are? Okay.
Yes.
And so we'd still need water licenses for wells?
Yes, they are different, but the way that they will be looked at is we're still in the Bow River Basin. They might not look at it as flow directly from the Bow, but they are going to look at it as who else is using the aquifer in the area, how is it being replenished, how much is being taken out of it, and that's where they start to put limitations on what's available for the wells.
Okay. And so if we're looking good for another few years, obviously this is sort of it's a game of, not a game, but it's sort of like you have to keep augmenting one thing, the licenses, the supply, the storage, you sort of keep these things in tandem, and so then you can do those sorts of things. What, is there anything in your presentation that sort of talks about even longer term? Are we like 25 or even 30 years, like what we're looking at? Are we going to potentially be tapping into the Red Deer Basin at some point? Is that something that we'd be thinking about longer term as well?
I would say tapping into the Red Deer, I'm not saying it's impossible, probably not economical, at least at this point. The one thing I want to note about wells is if you're taking water from wells, then you're getting into treatment processes.
Yeah.
And because we're not currently treating, a treatment facility isn't something that can be used one day and not used another. And so we're going to get to the point then where it's like, it's not using Calgary and wells, it's using Calgary or wells. And that may not be an option. And having two sources is definitely an option, but if you're not getting enough from a well source to build the infrastructure to treat it and have the proper staff to continue to operate it, it doesn't economically make sense. So it can definitely be looked at, but there's many more things than just is there water under the ground available.
Okay, thank you.
CAO Scoble?
Just a supplementary comment to that too. So if we go back to the water line, that was built in 2010, and the town took out debt financing on that. I believe it's paid off this year or the previous year. Anyways, about 15-year borrowing on it. So typically a water line, service life on it is 50 years plus, right? So we need to look long term. You can consider another supplementary water source, but we also have to remember that we've made a major investment in a water line, and to not fully exploit that asset over the life is not, it's not the best use. The taxpayer is not getting the best return on the money that they've invested in that water line. So, it doesn't mean we don't have to look at other sources or look at a complementary source, but we should also be looking at how do we fully exploit an asset that we made a major investment in on behalf of the taxpayer.
That's a really good point. And the other one that I was this old when I learned tonight from you that aquifers are considered covered by the water licenses. I did not know that. I thought that was just free and available water below us. For many years, I've had lots of seniors in the community who would say, why aren't you guys tapping into the aquifers below Strathmore?
So to clarify that misconception, a individual on a rural property can drill a well for their personal use. So that's a lot of times where that misconception comes from, is you have a limited allocation available to you for personal or livestock use, but that's it. A municipality is a completely different situation.
Deputy Mayor Wiley.
Bear with me while I bumble through this. So there's an important balancing act that's going on between our capacity, in other words, our line from Calgary, our licenses, and our storage. And you've said that the capacity on the water line is still, you called it not a pinch point. And our licenses at normal growth rates are good until 2040, something like that. Now, getting more capacity from the Calgary water line, to me, just means turning on the taps, so to speak. But we have to actually keep buying the licenses so that we can increase the capacity from the water line, right? So even though we could technically bring more water in from Calgary, we have to make sure that we have the licenses to do that, the rights to that water.
Yes, so in my way of thinking of it, the water can't go in that pipe if we don't have a license for it. Calgary has the ability to treat it for us, but Calgary cannot withdraw it from the river, treat it for us, and put it into the pipe that sends it to Strathmore unless we have a license to do that. So that's where that limitation is. We could push more water into that pipe physically, but without the license, we don't have the available allocation to do so.
Through the chair, Mayor, if I might, an important point to note too is we can keep buying licenses, but there are no new licenses for the Bow River. So the government is not allowing more water to come out of the river. In fact, the licenses, I believe, are over allocated actually to some degree. So that's going to, your population is going to continue to grow in the Calgary region and in the province and in the world and whatever, but it's a finite resource and it's currently capped. So that's really going to drive our behavior going forward in terms of water conservation, water reuse, water recycling. And in fact, I think it was in a recent mandate letter from the Premier, the province is talking about water reuse now, which has been a long, long time coming in this province. So it's gonna, we just can't keep going out buying unlimited licenses, because there's only a finite number of licenses there, and eventually there's going to be none available, and in time the price of them will keep going up. I liken it to buying season tickets for the Flames, where you have to pay for the rights to the tickets before you pay for the tickets. That's what we're doing with water licenses right now, is you're paying for the rights to get the water in the first place, which is not, of course, the way it used to be historically.
Yeah, it would be nice if every resident were able to watch this presentation, because it's very important for them to understand that as our council moves forward in this term, next term, every term, we're going to be looking on the lookout for water licenses, and they are expensive, as our CEO just said. They're in the free market, and so there's a lot of competition for these water licenses, because there is no more water on the Bow River. The licenses have already been awarded, perhaps even more have been handed out than is even in capacity. And so our council is going to continue to look for those. Our administration is going to continue to look for those. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Chisholm.
So a couple questions into CA Scoble. The City of Calgary would increase our water capacity if we ask them to increase our water capacity?
I'll defer to Ethan, I believe so. But again, the constraint being we have to have a license for them to treat that volume of water for us.
So I'll give the elevator pitch, but basically we meet with the City of Calgary every 4 years. And through that process, we tell the city how much water we think that we're going to use. And we also do that with all of the neighboring communities that are connected to the City of Calgary. And they use that to project, do they need to expand their water treatment plant? Do they need to expand their transmission capacity? And all of those sort of things. And then that's how they set the water rate for us. So each 4-year cycle, we meet, we all determine what we think we're going to use, including the city themselves. From that, they make a plan in terms of, okay, we have sufficient capacity, or no, we need to increase capacity. And in order to meet the demand, we need to do this work, and therefore this is what the costs are. And I'll be honest, we're not looking just at 4 years. We are giving them a 4-year projection, but we're also giving them ballpark numbers for 8 years and 12 years and 16 years, so that we're not hopefully getting to the point where Calgary says, sorry, but we can't physically provide that water.
So our enterprise risk management has identified that and have solutions to that. Second question is, what do they do over in Europe on, they've been around a lot longer than us. They have growth, established growth over the years. What did they do in their water conservation?
Sorry, what was the first part?
Over in Europe. In Europe, what have you seen over there, and how they?
Well, again, Canada has been very fortunate over the years with our large resources and our small relative population base, right? So, Canada has not by any means been leading in water reuse and water recycling and water conservation. So, the European countries, some of the Asian countries are far more advanced in that, Singapore, I think I've told council, has been drinking their treated effluent for 20 years. Orange County injects treated effluent into an aquifer and mixes it with aquifer water, and withdraws it, right? So we're seeing it creep up the Rockies. Denver has a wastewater reuse plant that I toured about 10 years ago that had been up and running for 5 years. So for 15 years, Denver's had a plant. But as we're seeing the Bow Glacier significantly melt compared to historical, it's creeping up the Rockies, and now we're starting to see it, right? So, we will have to learn as a nation, as a province, as a community from communities like Europe that haven't had that same resource abundance with a larger population base.
I'm wondering if we're at the point now, as we get closer to our visioning work, that we could consider the water aspect something that we can discuss and vision and work on our vision. I'm not sure what would be the easiest things to do as far as reuse, but I know possibly one of the visioning exercises or things we could consider is looking at a way to encourage maybe new, I know in Las Vegas, for example, they've got bylaws where there can be no front lawns on any new subdivisions, and they've got bylaws now shrinking the size of outdoor pools. And then the other thing I read in the article was that they were going to seriously look in Nevada as far as golf courses are on their target as far as water use. So I'm just wondering, maybe that can be added to our visioning weekend. We could also consider potential grant programs for properties that do xeriscaping in the front lawns, front yards, and maybe new home construction.
You know, Alberta has done some things, like there are golf courses in the province that use treated effluent for their irrigation instead of the fresh water, right? And so, you know, and then in turn, some of those golf courses have given up their licenses or sold them, and that's given to, you know, a municipal potable water supply or whatever, and then they receive the treated effluent for their irrigation instead. 85% of commercial water use does not have to be potable water. It can be utility water, so that can be storm water collected at the site and reused on the site or what have you. So there's, you know, there's a lot of innovation out there, but there's a lot of established practice. It's becoming time that Alberta is going to have to start looking at adopting some of these practices of other communities.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I had a question about the licenses. Are the licenses, do they have an expiry date on them? Or once you own them, we've got them forever?
Typically, they do have an expiry date on them. However, usually that's just a renewal date. And a lot of times is what that is that allows the province to protect themselves should new initiatives need to be implemented on all licenses. If you look at a license that we have now, some of them have what are called in-stream objectives. So if the Bow River is extremely low, we're actually not allowed to use that license. It rarely happens. It has happened in my time here. We've never been in a situation where it impacted water use, but it's a thing that occurs from time to time, and there's a reason that it's in those licenses, so that when the time comes that there is low flow, there's a priority system. And that priority system means who gets water and who doesn't.
A couple of years ago, the province was on the state of declaring a state of emergency over water. There was a drought anticipated, and you know, fortunately, Mother Nature came through for us. But you probably remember it from the media. We did talk about it in council here, but there was actually an excellent collaboration of everybody in the province came together, and there was a priority or a hierarchy established. So people came first. Then livestock and crops, and then in industry. But, you know, in that case, the irrigation districts actually stepped up and were, you know, willing to allocate some of their water to human needs, right? So there is a provincial plan that was established, and fortunately we haven't had to exercise that yet, but the day could very well come.
Okay. Just based on the conversation I'm hearing here as well, is that if we have to use an effluent to water lawns and water golf courses and those sorts of things, has any research been done by administration to consider having a reservoir of effluent water, somehow how that would be gathered or modified in the recent past, or is that something that's way off in the future?
We actually do have a bit of a reservoir. We have a couple of effluent storage ponds at our wastewater treatment plant, and that's for a multitude of reasons. One is sometimes that there's the need to mix effluent for certain quality standards. Two, because we do have a agricultural user that uses our effluent throughout the summer months, and sometimes it's just a delivery thing. And three, we need to control how much water we send to the Bow at certain times of the year, and having those ponds allows us to balance the difference between demand and ability to discharge. So we currently have 2 ponds. We have a third pond that could be used, but it hasn't been necessary for the last decade or so.
Okay, great, thank you.
And through the chair, if I might, Ethan actually touched on a very important point, but we should make more noise about this than we do. We actually do permit our effluent for reuse for irrigation purposes already, so.
Thank you for that. Carry on, Ethan.
Yeah, so just to wrap up here, a couple of things. So when we look at the Wildflower Reservoir, I mean, based on growth, probably 2035 to 2040 when we need that expansion, that's targeting probably $12 to $15 million project. When we look at the East Reservoir, I'm hopeful that's more like 2050, 2060. But we're targeting a $40 or $50 million project. So these are significant investments for the community.
Ethan, the current Brentwood site that we're decommissioning,
Yes.
it's not big enough to be the same kind of addition as that East Reservoir that,
It's one, not big enough, and two, not ideally located.
okay.
The best case scenario is it would be far east, somewhere along George Freeman Trail, considering the potential for development on that side of town.
And are we thinking below ground or a water tower or,
That's a decision that doesn't
Okay.
need to be made now.
okay, thank you. And is that something where we would have to start looking ahead to developers as far as negotiating land for it as well?
Yeah, so if those areas start to develop, particularly north of the current edge field, we would start to negotiate with them in terms of, can we allocate a site? Is there a way to use what would be an MR dedication instead and use it as a public utility dedication? To be honest, where the current rural fire hall is wouldn't be the worst case scenario. So maybe there's a transition period where that makes sense for multiple parties. I don't know, but somewhere in that area, as development occurs, we are going to have to make that decision, and we've definitely got that on our radar when necessary.
And if you need, expansion further at Wildflower, Deputy Mayor Wiley's backyard again is available if you want to put a tank.
I've got a list
Thank you,
started, so.
Thank you. CAO Scobel.
Just so water towers and reservoirs, like water towers are becoming a bit popular again. They're less of a space constraint and all that, but of course you have pumping to get the water up there. But reservoirs can be multi-use too, depending on the size of the reservoir. So I used to have a reservoir behind my house when I lived in Medicine Hat, but it was actually large enough that it was actually a soccer field. So the kids played soccer on top of the water reservoir. So you can actually make them multi-use depending on the footprint that you have available.
So yeah, I've touched on this. I won't go through it again, but water resources, ECRW redundancy, water license acquisitions. We know which one is the most important, but as we've talked about as well, water conservation and reducing the water reuse, finding uses for gray and purple water, and water innovation, creating opportunities for effluent use. So it's already been touched on. I was going to mention that, as council goes through their strategic planning, my recommendation is to consider this one as well. I do want to also cover, we have EPCOR as our operator in town. They are very qualified. They are great to work with. They have extensive knowledge. They're a large company. I know many people see them as local, maybe even Edmonton-based, but don't forget they are North America-wide. So they've got a lot of valuable resources for us.
Ethan, one of the questions I saw come up fairly often on Facebook, and people weighed in on it as they typically do, but that was during the summer when the Calgary water line had its major problem, and we were we tried to ration our water, cut the usage down. And the question kept coming up, and people were asking, why don't we have our own treatment plant? Why don't we have a reservoir like we used to in the good old days? Would you be able to just touch on that as far as why we wouldn't? What's the cost benefit?
It's an efficiency thing, absolutely. Obviously, Calgary has for many years invested in water treatment. They are well qualified to do so. They do it well. They do it efficiently. And that's why many neighboring municipalities use them as their treatment source. A water treatment plant is a significant investment, and operating a water treatment plant is a significant investment. So if there's a way to limit that risk in terms of the treatment side, obviously we've increased our risk because of our delivery, but I would still say that the comparison of those two risks, we're in the better situation currently. Like I said, it's significant investment, significant amount of qualifications required to run such a thing, and it's likely that our water costs would not be any cheaper than they are now.
Thank you. CAO Scobel?
The important thing to remember about water plants is they're not an on-demand thing. You don't just leave them idling or they're shut down and you turn on the switch and you have water immediately. Again, there's the staffing component, but you just can't make water magically like out of your dispenser on your fridge, right? You have to. It takes days to get the plant up and running, and then you got time to make the water and all that sort of thing. So, if you've got a treatment facility, it's you know, it's kind of like a car. If you don't run a car for 2 years, and do you know if it's going to start up when you try to turn it over, right? You got to keep these things running. You got to keep them maintained. So, you know, it's, again, an efficiency thing. You know, it's a nice backup, nice source of redundancy, but there's a cost that comes with it. There's the capital cost, but there's the operating cost. Even if you're not producing the plant, you've still got plant costs coming from it. So,
Councillor Wegener?
Just going with the treatment facility, if we were to treat our own water, does that add any more liability to the town? I keep thinking back years ago to that, where was it, Walkerton, Ontario incident?
That's a good question. I'd have to think about that. I mean, I guess, you know, like our water is, the chlorine levels are tested when it comes into the reservoir, and there's actually a chlorine booster at our reservoir that would kill any bacteria in the water. There's always liability with any, you know, like I always say, water treatment. Somebody told me years ago when I was operating a big water plant that we had too much liability as a municipality operating a water plant, too much risk. And water treatment is risk mitigation in the first place, as opposed to giving every resident a 25-liter pail and saying, go get your own water out of the river and make it safe yourself. So it's a collaborative, collective risk management method in the first place. Yeah, I guess there could be some increased liability, but I mean, we have liability now. Water would not come out of a Calgary water treatment plant contaminated, and then it would get cleaned by the time, like, we've got our own liabilities along the water line, and we do monitoring for that, and we have a chlorine rebooster at the reservoir and that. So it's an interesting question. I don't know if I know the full answer to that.
But then again, we do have that redundancy system. They send us good. The water that we get from Calgary would be tested and treated, tested, and comes down, and then we have that backup system here with the chlorine injection in town.
If I may add to that, right now our water comes from the Bears Paw water treatment plant. And that water treatment plant is about as close to the freshwater source as you can get. Whereas if we were taking that water, like we historically did, and delivered it to Strathmore via the WID and then stored it in a raw water reservoir, you've opened up a lot of areas along that route, including your own water storage location, for potential contamination. So it might not change the water quality out of the water treatment plant, but it might change the process in order to treat that water, compared to what Calgary does, taking it directly from the Bow River as close as possible to its source.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, so it's a very interesting presentation, by the way. Really enjoying the conversation here going on. I have to asking the question. I mean, if we did have, like you say, like take water from the WID, put it in a reservoir, and then we did treat it. And I know that we can't commingle it with the rest of the water that we have, and we have to keep it running, because if it's not running, it's not going to stay fresh. And you have to sort of keep things moving. I mean, it seems to me that there's still a possibility that we could, you know, explore that. It doesn't have to happen this year, but I mean, we can explore it as sort of having a redundant water system just in case that water line breaks like it did. You know, in Calgary, fortunately, it wasn't our water line that broke, but it would be nice to have a redundant system so that we do have water. And I understand we can probably truck water in, but I don't know if we could truck enough in for the whole town if a crisis arose. Is that a possibility that we could do that? And also, to answer the question, if we did have to truck water in for the whole town and our main line broke and it wasn't going to be fixed right away, how long do we have, or are we able to do that?
Well, I mean, during the Calgary water outage, we actually mobilized a quasi emergency operations center. So we treated it as a severe incident. So during that time, we developed contingency plans if we couldn't get the water from Calgary. Excuse me. Basically, we have plans ready to go, but if we ever find ourselves in a situation that we're trucking water in, it's going to be $200,000 a day, and that will be basic water. You won't be doing laundry or running your dishwasher. That's just to drinking water and perhaps a shower every few days, right? So very expensive. Again, you know, in summarizing this presentation, the only constraint that we really have is water licenses. Every other constraint we have is solvable with money. And we can have a backup water system. We cannot fully exploit the investment already made in the water line. It just costs money. And that's what they pay council the big bucks for, I guess, is to make those decisions. But, you know, the licenses are the finite source. Anything else can be solved with money. Alternative water sources can be solved with money. But the water licenses cannot be solved. They're capped. So we have to do the best with the water that we do have available to us.
Thank you for that. Councillor Langmaid?
Thank you, Your Worship. In terms of, in this discussion of redundancy, would it be more cost-effective for us to build a redundant system where we have to treat the water, so a water treatment system, or would it be more cost-effective for us to invest in our water storage, our reservoirs, so that we have more water available to us in case of an emergency?
In short, of those two options, storage would be more cost-effective. However, I will point out a third option would be another line from Calgary, and that's not a cheap alternative. Right. But that gets you to where if one delivery system breaks, you've got a secondary delivery system. That's one that can be turned on and off as necessary compared to a separate treatment system. So I do want to point out that is a third option, not an inexpensive option, but of the two you offered, definitely storage capacity.
Perfect, thank you. Unfortunately, the redundant line probably wouldn't help us if the problem is Calgary.
Correct. Yep, correct.
Which historically has been the only problem. Thank you.
As far as reuse, as we look ahead again to our visiting weekend, are there next steps that are easier to do than others for a municipality and its residents to start, that we could actually start to work on quicker than others?
Yeah, so one that I've started to look at, and I'll be honest, I'm in the very early stages, is stormwater reuse. And is there things that our operations department can use stormwater for? Street cleaning might be an option. Watering of plants may be an option. The biggest thing right now is there is an Alberta Health guideline on stormwater reuse, and it has to very much depend on what is your exposure. So is there the possibility that somebody will touch that water? Is there a possibility that somebody will ingest that water? And how do you limit those exposures? So that's why street sweeping is probably, I'll call it an easier route. Lots of times they say that, you know, watering a park may not be an option because an hour later there could be a kid rolling around in the grass. There's no ill intent, but if that water is contaminated and then it gets on the grass and then somebody's rolling through it, there's that possibility. So it's just limiting those liabilities, and that's how it needs to be looked at.
It's counterintuitive, but your treated sewage water is actually cleaner than your storm water, right? Your storm water has dog poop and goose poop and fuels that have run off the street and everything, whereas your effluent is treated to a very high standard. So it's actually a better quality water, and that's something that the province has indicated looking at further, and something we need to think about is using that water as well.
Yeah, and when I mentioned this before a couple of times, when I was at the FCM conference in Halifax, their new library is shaped like book stacked, and they use the rainwater to, for lack of a better word, power their urinals and toilets. They use rainwater that the building collects. But thank you, Ethan. That was really, really interesting. Thank you very much. Sorry. All right, we move now to item 9.6, 2025 to 2026 Policing Support Grant Funding Agreement. Mark Pretzlaff.
Excuse me. Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. I'm here to speak tonight regarding the 2025-2026 Policing Service Support Grant Funding Agreement. The reason why this agenda item has just been walked on is because we just received it from the province this afternoon. As you can see in my report, this is funding from the province to support our RCMP, our policing costs. The amount of this year's grant is equivalent, is exactly the same as it was the previous year. And so What we're looking for here is support from council tonight before the deadline of Friday. So if there's any other questions of council, I'll do my best to try to answer them.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Langmaid.
Thank you, Worship. Just one simple question. We often talk about how we pay for 70% of our policing costs and feds pay for the other 30%. Is this that 30% that we often refer to?
Through the chair, no, Councillor Limey, this is just reduces our number entirely. So this is a grant on top of what we pay. So it's bonus money in reality that we do account for in our budget, but it just goes towards the general pot of it, so.
Nice, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Wiley.
Yeah, I think that was my question. So you had accounted for this in the budget, and it's exactly the same as last year's, you said, so this doesn't change anything.
Through the chair, exactly the same as last year.
And did I hear that correctly? The province gave it to us today, and it's due on Friday.
Through the chair, that's correct.
I couldn't get away with that as a teacher.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wiley. Any further questions for Mark, or is a councillor prepared to put a motion on the floor? Deputy Mayor Wiley?
I move that council authorize the mayor to sign the 2025-2026 Policing Support Grant Funding Agreement as presented in Attachment 1.
Thank you for that motion. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor? That motion is carried. We move now to 9.7. Thank you, Mark. We move now to item 9.7, which is a notice of motion regarding soft levies. So I'd like to turn the chair over to Deputy Mayor Wiley.
Thank you. I now have the chair.
So I would like to submit this notice of motion regarding the development of soft levies. Whereas the Municipal Government Act grants authority to municipalities to charge off-site levies for new or expanded community recreation, fire hall, police station, and library facilities, hereinafter referred to as soft levies. And whereas the town of Strathmore has not previously charged soft levies for development within the town, and whereas council recognizes that growth will have a significant financial impact to the town, and whereas the town is looking for opportunities to mitigate the financial impact of growth on existing residents and businesses, and whereas soft levies will mitigate the capital costs associated with growth on existing residents and businesses, notice is hereby given that the following motion will be brought forward for consideration at the regular council meeting on December 10th, 2025. That council direct administration to return to the January 14th, 2026 Committee of the Whole with a report relating to the potential development of bylaw amendments relating to soft levies and their application, and that administration return with a proposed implementation plan relating to the incorporation of soft levies. And if I can just speak to this, I don't think I do on a notice of motion, but now this is the motion. So yeah, I think this is just a way for us to look at ways to help us. I think many of us ran on managing the growth, and there is a definite situation where our town is going to grow quickly. And this will help us be able to capture soft levies, capture funding for the things that we'll need to build and create as far as our rapid growth for our residents. So that's why I'm bringing this forward.
Thank you so much, Mayor Fuel. I really do love this motion. I really am excited. Just a reminder to the rest of council, tonight we're voting on whether or not to even have it, even to direct administration to bring something to the Committee of the Whole meeting on January 14th. I also campaigned on this. I think we need to grow prudently. I think we need to mitigate our future growth and make sure that our current taxpayers are not subsidizing the future residents as much as possible. I think that this goes a long way. I really appreciate our administration working with you, Mayor, on this. Just a question for administration. Is there any concerns from our administration on this going forward on maybe perhaps the deadline or anything in here that you would want to direct our attention to?
Through the chair, in discussion with the mayor, the intent of the timeline here, it's a little tight, but the intent of it is to provide council the information for discussion at your strategic planning session later in January.
Councillor Hyde.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, why has this not been done in the past? Would anybody be able to offer some insight to that?
So it became available in 2018, correctly, if I recall, under the MGA. I would say less communities chose to implement it than more communities, simply from it can be seen as a disincentive to investment in your community by, the private sector in, new developments, right? So that's mainly the reason for it. I would say less communities chose to do it in Alberta than actually did it, so, yeah.
All right, so just a little follow-up to that. So is there, with the growth that we anticipate is in front of us, our willingness to put the soft levies in now would be because of we're anticipating the growth is coming one way or the other, or?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a proactive measure. I mean, I don't want to prejudice what the report might say, but council has opportunities. You can exercise discretion. You don't always have to apply them if there's an alternative deal that provides equity or I guess equity would be the word. Everybody comes out whole. So there's alternative arrangements that could be made. That could be it wouldn't necessarily be a mandatory thing. It could be a discretionary thing if there's other ways to accomplish the same outcome.
All right, thank you. That answers my question.
Well, that's very interesting, CAO Scoble. So you said that even though whatever report comes to us regarding adding soft levies, likely within it would contain an option of, as you always call it, horse trading.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, that's great. Councillor Brown?
Yeah, I just, what a great idea. What a great idea at this time. I think, thank you for bringing that forward, Mayor Fuel. I definitely will be supporting this motion, and I'd like to see what the good that comes from it and how it's worded when it comes forward. Thank you.
Councillor Langmaid?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I just want to echo my thanks to the mayor for bringing this forward. I recall this conversation happening back in late 2024 when the last revision of the offsite levies bylaw came to us, and council at that time had expressed some interest in seeing this come forward in the future, and I'm glad to see it coming forward now in terms of, for the reason of ensuring that development pays for, could possibly pay for the growth that the community will see as a result of that development, so that it's not carried wholly by the residents and businesses already existing in Strathmore. So thank you very much, Your Worship. I appreciate you bringing this forward.
Yeah, because alternately, I mean, clearly the developers might not be the biggest fan of this, and certainly it's going to increase the cost of new home development in Strathmore. So there's definitely some negative side effects to it. But alternately, what it means then is that current residents are paying for example, a new fire hall, even though the one we have meets the capacity of the town right now. So the example would be taxes go up for current residents to pay for the development of a new fire hall that's going to be servicing all the new residents. So I really like this, but I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have in the January committee of the whole meeting, and also talk about some of the negatives. And I think Councillor Hyde, you were referring to that, like if it's such an obvious slam dunk, like what are the costs? Why are other communities not doing it? So it'll give us some time too as council to do our homework and look into it. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Chair. It certainly gives another opportunity to negotiate and maybe leverage it for other things. So well done, you guys. Good job, and I'm looking forward to seeing the proposal come back. Is there other things that are on the radar that will provide us opportunities to enhance our negotiating on development?
I don't know so much about negotiating, but you know, we are looking to bring forward MDP amendments or a new MDP. Actually, we've got a new MDP that's probably 70-80%. So again, that's where council and the community as a whole, because it's a public hearing and you actually do public engagements besides just having the public hearing on the MDP. But that's where the community and council can really influence what it thinks the long-term vision for the community is, and how the community wants to grow in the longer term here. So yeah, I wouldn't say specific negotiation, but other growth-related mechanisms are coming forward to this council for consideration.
You said it better than I did.
If there's no further discussion, I call the motion. And that passes unanimously. And I happily relinquish the chair.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Wiley, and thank you all for your support on that. I think it could give us definitely lots to discuss. We move now to 10 bylaws. We have no bylaws tonight. 11, councillor information and inquiries. 11.1, questions between councillors and council statements. Do any councillors have any questions for fellow councillors or wish to make any statements? Deputy Mayor Wiley.
Today is the last regular scheduled council meeting before our Christmas break. So I just wish all the residents of Strathmore a very merry, happy, and blessed Christmas, and a happy new year to you and your families.
Thank you for that. Any other councillors? We move now to item 11.3, question and answer period. Do any councillors have any questions for administration? Seeing none. We don't have any administrative inquiries, I believe. And I did my notice of motion. So that brings us to item 13, adjournment, and I will adjourn the meeting at 8:12 p.m.